Continuing from the Egyptian myth, a guide to the ancient gods and legends, the day, sky, and the sun. For an Egyptian, stepping onto the day, the dry earth, manifestation of the god Geb, into the heat of the day, res life, giving power, he might feel a light wind on his face, the skin of the god Shu, and perhaps see an old lonesome cloud, the bones of Shu, floating in the distance. And so long as there wasn't as long as there wasn't one of Egypt's rare rainstorms, the efflux of Shu, he might stop for a moment to enjoy the white expanse of the perfect blue sky before him. But how did he understand this imposing natural features and the yellow ball that crosses it each day, not to mention its nighttime counterparts? The hieroglyphic for sky pet provides our first insight into the ancient mindset. It displays a flat surface rather than a dome, with its edges downward to make contact with the earth. The support of the sky vault could also be depicted as columns of scepters, which the pharaohs himself had the responsibility for securing. The god Shu, however, as the sky main support, had since creation supported the goddess Nut, the sky vault, aside by the 8 head gods, 2 of each of their limbs. Apparently, Shu created these gods because he was weary of holding up the sky alone. It was Nut, divine responsibility, to ensure the sky remained in place, as her force was all that held back the waters of noon above. This is why the sky appears blue. It is noon, inert waters eternally represents above all mankind, repelled by Nut's force, this ever-present threat of a creation deluge from above as a daily reminder of the disorder that is all around. Indeed, Nut acted more like an invisible force than a transparent wall. If you were able to fly up and reach the limit of the sky, you could put your hands through this force and touch the waters above, like dipping your fingers into a vast upturned ocean. You did not simply slam into an invisible barrier. For this reason, the sky could be sailed upon, and like on any body of water, it requires a boat. It is how the sun god, the force responsible for ensuring the sun disk circuit each day, traveled from the eastern horizon to the western horizon. He sailed upon his day barquette called Manjet. The sun was the Creator's most visible and powerful manifestation. His light brought heat and growth and enabled life to thrive while wiping away the hated darkness. It shows march over the horizon each morning as a sign that all was well in the cosmos. Fine gold does not match your splendor. one sun hymn relates, through you do all eyes see. They lack aim when your majesty sets. When you stir to rise at dawn, your brightness opens the eyes of the herds. As told in the myth of creation, this slow-moving ball of flame was the sun's fiery eye, watching over his world as hours passed until darkness fell. Although often a solar disk, or a hawk-headed man in a boat, the sun god had other manifestations too. In the morning he was Capri, shown as a dung beetle because of this insect's habits of pushing balls of dung along the ground, just as he rolled the sun disk skyward. At midday, when strongest, he became red. At this time, when the sun appears to pause high in the sky, the Egyptian word for midday was Ahu, also meaning stand still. Isis and Seth fought the chaos snake Apophis who protect Re. They were always victorious, so the solar barquette could continue on its way. In the evening, the sun god became Atum, oldest of the gods, reflecting the sun's great age at the end of the day. When the sun took this form, his boat had to be dragged by jackals to its place of setting on the horizon of the western mountains. The night sky. At the end of each day, the goddess Nut swallowed the sun god, plunging the land into darkness. In the sun's moments, as its rays vanishes and its orbs dip below the horizon, the sky turned red, signifying a time of danger, and then black. The stars now sparkled, the Milky Way glistened, and the moon and the planets charted their course through the darkness. A new world became visible. Just as Earth featured areas of water and land, the night sky presented a similar terrain. The Egyptians envisioned the route that the sun, moon, and planets followed through the sky as a winding waterway, liking it to a river. This narrow band is today known as the ecliptic. The heavenly bodies' meanderings remained constantly within this band throughout the years. It extremes to the east and west, marking its banks. The winding water wave divided the night sky into two, with zone called Field of Offerings to its north and the Fields of Reeds to its south. To the north also were the imperishable stars, while in the south were the unwearying stars. Stars that never set below the horizon, and so were always present. Some regarded the stars as decorations of the body of the goddess Nut, whose shape would seem like the Milky Way. her head of the goddess Nut. Her head, the stars near the constellation of Gemini, and her legs, a division in the star pattern at Cygnus. Others saw the stars as the patterns of the body of the sky cow, Methet Weret, the great flood, whose body was thought to be the winding waterway. The Book of Nuts, a New Kingdom, collection of the sacred texts, accompanied by an image of the goddess, describes the stars as traveling across the sky over the course of the night. This violent act of consumption is said to anger Gep, who regards the stars as his children. Luckily, before Gep explodes with rage, Shu reassures him, "Don't quarrel with her because she eats your offsprings. They will live. They will go out from the place of her headquarters in the east each day, just as she bears Re." The Egyptians divided the sky into 36 decans, or groups of stars, which could be depicted on the ceilings of tombs and temples. Each decan rose above the horizon just before dawn for a period of 10 days each year. Certain constellations became associated with particular gods. The god Sa was the constellation Orion, and husband to the goddess Septet, the star Sirius, whose appearance on the eastern horizon is drawn after roughly 70 days' absence, heralded the annual inundations and the new agricultural year. This event was called the coming forth of Sabdet. Sabdet's connection to the inundation and thus the renewal of agricultural fertility is perhaps why she is sometimes regarded as a daughter of Osiris. The shape of Ura, major called Meskhetu by the Egyptians, was seen as the hind leg of an ox and associated with Hathor. Other constellations are Ape, Morning Post, Giant, and Female Hippopotamus. Though these have not yet been identified in the sky. 5 planets known as stars that know no fear were noted by the Egyptians. Each became associated with a god sailing in his celestial barquette. Mercury was Sebegu, a god connected to Seth. Venus was the one who crosses, or god of the morning. Mars was Horus of the horizon, and Horus the red Jupiter. Or Horus the red Jupiter was Horus who limits the 2 lands, and Saturn was Horus, bull of the sky. The moon. Once the sun had set, the moon took charge as its nightly replacements, acting as the sun's god deputies, a duty typically attributed to the god Thoth. Like the sun, the moon traversed the sky aboard a boat, but shines a weaker light upon the land. How could this be explained? And why did the moon change shape? Of the myths that surrounded the moon, most prevalent was that it was Horus' weakened left eye, as opposed to his strong right eye, the sun. Horus' left eye was damaged, typically by Seth, who was said to have torn it into 6 pieces, but was repaired normally by Thoth, who restored it with his fingers by spitting on it. This act of renewal was repeated each lunar month as the sun slowly waxed until complete. For this reason, the moon was also called the one that repeats its form and the old man who becomes a child. The moon was also associated with Osiris, as the Egyptians saw the reconstitution of his dismembered body cut into 14 parts in this variant of the myth. In the nightly restoration of the moon's full shape. This was regarded as an act of rebirth. A stele from the reign of Ramses IV greets Osiris, saying, "You are the moon in the sky. You rejuvenate yourself according to your desires and become old when you wish." Funerary scenes show Anubis leaning over the lunar disk in the act of mummification, just as he is shown leaning over the deceased. Furthermore, because of the moon's association with Osiris, the sowing of the crops was regarded as best done during a full moon. In its crescent form, the moon shape appears as the horns of a bull, an animal associated with fertility and power. Various gods are connected with the moon in addition to Thoth. Most common are Kasu and Iha. The god Iha importance was later absorbed by Khonshu, who is best known as the son of Amun and Mut, completing their family triad, depicted for much of Egyptian history as a child wearing a side lock of youth, with a lunar crescent and a full moon atop his head. In the Old Kingdom, when the pyramid texts were composed, Khonshu was presented as a vicious deity who helped the king absorb other gods' strength by catching them and helping him to devour their bodies. As a cosmic deity, Khonshu could also be shown as a falcon-headed man. Sometimes the lunar god in question is depicted at the center of the full moon. Otherwise, the Wigat eye, the restored eye of Horus, might be shown. Also, each of the 15 days leading to a full moon was presided over by a different god, Thoth, first, who on each day performed the task of filling it. The full moon went for 15 days, and each of these gods, one by one, left the lunar eye. The Duat, the sun's journey during the day time, hours was a matter of great interest to the Egyptian. Where did it go? Would it rise again? Through traditions buried in the specific details of the sun's exploits. During the night, the anchoring themes remained consistent after passing below the western horizon. The sun journeyed through another part of the created world. It was Duat, a dangerous location full of demons and the dead who attempted to assist or hinder the sun on his way to being reborn in the morning. Just want to give you a picture. I don't know if you could see that, but the location of the Duat is never well defined, though it is described as any place that is not sky or land. According to one custom, the sun spent the night within the body of Nut, gestating in her womb, ready to be born again in the morning, rejuvenated. Here and elsewhere in the textual sources, the Duat is located in the sky, somehow within the body of Nut, or within some invisible tunnel. In other cases, it is clear that the Egyptians regarded Duat as underground. In one myth, the god shut down into the ground to gain Osiris's attention, while snakes living in the ground were believed to have a special connection to Duat. In offering rituals, the liquid used, such as water, wine, and blood, drained into the ground to reach the dead and the gods of Duat. Whatever its location, the Duat was certainly part of the created world, and so for this reason, otherworld, netherworld, and underworld are unsuitable translations, for they lent it a sense of removal from the world around us that was not intended. Indeed, far world might be the most suitable English rendering. Like a distant land, the Duat was present in the created world, but only accessible to those who met one of two criteria, being dead or a deity. The sun nightly journey. Although the dead spent their time facing their own challenges in Duat, the deceased traveled with the sun god to Duat each night and participated in his renewal. This renewal, however, was never guaranteed. For every night, the sun god and his followers fought a great battle against the prominence of disorder and the chaos snake Apophis. This event were spread over the 12 hours of the night, with the passage from 1 hour to the next blocked by a tall gate, each protected by its own guardian, normally in the forms of a fearsome snake. So each day, having grown weak, old, and tired, the sun god descended below the western horizon towards a great gateway called the Swallowers of All, the entrance to the Duat. There he was met by jubilants, followers, and welcomed by baboons. The god and his entourage, mainly in their own boats, then sailed along a watery expanse called Werner's, a place of abundance, where people wore seeds of corn in their hair. Those who approached the solar flotilla were assigned land and provisions by the sun god. After the gods had navigated the waters of Osiris in the 40th hour of the night, the Duat landscapes changed. A solar flotilla passed from a land of abundance and water to the dry desert carven as Rastal in the land of Sokar, who is on his sand. The path through this scorched landscape zigzagged and was interrupted by fire and gates. Wicked snakes with legs transverse the sands, and the solar boat itself was forced to transform into a snake to ease its movement. But even so, rest followers were still forced to drag it through the sand. In the 5th hour of the night, the solar boat entered the realm of the dead, where Isis and Nephthys protected the burial mount of Osiris, and the lake of fire burnt the enemies of order, while purifying those that had lived just lives. The waters of the noon flowed through the terrain, carrying those that had drowned and never received a proper burial. In the 6th hour of the night, the solar boat approached a well brimming with the waters of noon. The sun god's corpse, in the form of a beetle, lay in the water where it united with Osiris. This was the key moment of the night. Osiris' regenerative powers now energized the weakened sun god, providing him with the strength required to begin his journey by the eastern horizon. The king of Egypt lined up to watch, and Thoth healed the solar eye. In the 7th hour of the night, Red protected by the Mehen snake, defeated his enemies. Seth and Isis attacked the chaos snakes Apophis, while others, added by the scorpion goddess Serket, tied his body down. Having squashed the prominence of disorder, the sun followers pushed their enemies, and a snake-headed demon bound and beheaded the enemies of Osiris. The 8th hour now began, in which the victorious sun provided garments for the grateful dead. Similarly, in the 9th hour, the sun provided cloths for the dead, while others brought grain to feed them. Here too, the enemies of Osiris were punished, this time in a court of law. With goddesses lighting the way, serpents upon their heads. In the 10th hour, the solar boat arrived at the one with deep water and high banks, inhabiting a rectangular pool of water. Those that had drowned were saved by Horus, who provided them with a proper afterlife. In the 11th hour, the god prepared for the god's rebirth at the eastern horizon, and the enemies of Re, were annihilated, some immersed in pits of fire. Isis and Nephthys, in the form of snakes, took royal crowns to the city of Zais, and a snake called the World Encircler regenerated the sun. The god now entered the body of this world encircling snake, marking the onset of the 12th and final hour of the night. Elderly figures dragged the solar boat through the snake body, emerging from its mouth as newborn children. Dawn arrived, and Capri, the solar beetle, rejuvenated the young, flew towards the sky raised by the god Shu, duly closed the Duat's gates behind him. The sun rose over the twin lion, ruddy, and a new day began. The preceding descriptions is based on the Amduat, the book of What is the Duat, an afterlife text copied onto the walls of the New Kingdom royal tombs. And, as time progressed, however, royal tombs were decorated with additional afterlife books, each presenting the sun's God's trial and tribulations within the Duat in a highly different manner. The Book of the Gates, for example, placed its emphasis on the gates that the solar bucket had to pass on its way to the dawn, and shows the ram headed by of the sun god, encompassed by the protective coils of the Mekhen snake aboarded his boat, flanked by the god Hu and Sia. The Book of the Gates also includes a scene depicted Osiris' judgment hall between the 5th and 6th hours. Here, a pig, as a symbol of disorder, is scared away and invisible enemies beneath the god's feet. In the 6th hour, assistant carry the corpse of the sun god, but his body is invisible. Contact with his flesh renders the arms of his carriers invisible too. In the 7th hour, the enemies of Re are tied to jackals-headed stakes of Geb to be tortured by demons. In the Book of the Gates scene, the sun is reborn from Nom rather than raised by Shu. The Book of the Caverns, unlike earlier compositions, place emphasis on the torture of damned, while the Book of the Earth forces on the role played by god Geb, Aker, a god of guarded the eastern and western horizon, and Tatanen in the solar resurrection. Very interesting. Very interesting. Aten, the Aten is the physical, visible sun disk which radiates heat and light. It is known from the Middle Kingdom, but only became important as a god in its own right during the 18th dynasty, culminating with the reign of Akhenaten, meaning he who is effective of the Aten. When for a short time the Aten became the soul state deity to Akhenaten, the Aten was transcendent God, unlike the traditional gods who were limited by time and space. Furthermore, Aten could only be understood by the king alone. The rest of the Egypt populations, including the priests, could only gain access to him through Akhenaten. Such a heretical approach to religion was not tolerated for much longer than Akhenaten's reign, and under his son Tutankhamun, the traditional cults were re-established. These are the constellations depicted in tombs of kings. This is Anubis, leans over the lunar disk in a posture familiar from scenes of the god mummifying Osiris. Then this is the 14th god of the waning moon, including Thoth. Wow. And this is the Amudat, 4th hour. The desert of Rastu is crossed by zigzagging path. And I am going to start a new video because it's only 38 minutes and 36 whatever seconds that it just loads up videos. So going on to the next. Thank you.